Dr. Jasmine Washington stared at the airline crew frozen in horror as the entire first-class cabin fell silent. The flight attendant who'd smugly handed her economy meal minutes ago now trembled at the legal document in Jasmine's hand. "This plane isn't going anywhere today," Jasmine announced. "Before we dive into how Dr. Washington ended up grounding an entire commercial flight, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling. Trust me, you'll want to see how this powerful woman turns the tables on those who underestimated her." 3 days earlier, Dr. Jasmine Washington had been hunched over her microscope in the neurology lab at Howard University Hospital when her phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. The International Medical Sciences Conference in San Francisco wanted her to present her groundbreaking research on racial disparities in pain management. The invitation had come last minute after another speaker canceled, leaving Jasmine just 72 hours to prepare. "They want me to present on Sunday. That's in 3 days." Jasmine exclaimed to her empty lab. Her heart raced with equal parts excitement and anxiety. Her research documented how black patients consistently received inadequate pain treatment compared to white patients with identical symptoms. This presentation could change medical protocols nationwide. Despite the short notice, Jasmine didn't hesitate. She immediately booked a first-class ticket using 3 months of savings. For a presentation this important, where she'd be one of the few black female presenters, she needed to arrive well-rested and prepared. The 6-hour flight in cramped economy seating would leave her exhausted and wrinkled, diminishing her professional presence before she even began. That night, as Jasmine carefully packed her presentation materials, memories of her grandmother flooded back. 20 years ago in Memphis, Grandma Esther had complained of chest pain for weeks. The local doctors dismissed her concerns as anxiety or indigestion, prescribing antacids instead of conducting proper tests. By the time someone took her seriously, the cancer had metastasized throughout her body. She died 3 weeks later. "This one's for you, Grandma," Jasmine whispered, gently placing a small framed photo of her grandmother into her carry-on. The painful memory had driven her through medical school, through her 14-hour residency shifts, and through every moment she felt like giving up. While her colleagues had pursued more lucrative specialties, Jasmine had dedicated herself to changing the system from within. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders as she rehearsed her presentation in front of her bathroom mirror for the 4th time. Every word had to be perfect. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, she knew her performance wouldn't just reflect on her, it would affect opportunities for those who came after her. "You must speak twice as well to be considered half as good," her mother had always told her. The familiar knot formed in her stomach as she considered the audience she would face, predominantly white, predominantly male, and not always receptive to discussions about racial bias in their profession. Jasmine meticulously laid out her charcoal gray suit on the bed. Professional, conservative, but still confident. She'd learned early in her career that her appearance would be scrutinized in ways her white colleagues never experienced. Too casual, and she wouldn't be taken seriously. Too flashy, and she'd be considered unprofessional. The balance was exhausting to maintain, but necessary. As she finally fell into bed at 1 a.m, Jasmine set 3 alarms. She couldn't afford to be late. Her presentation wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a chance to save lives like her grandmother's, to ensure that pain was taken seriously regardless of the patient's skin color. Tomorrow would be challenging, but Jasmine Washington had never backed down from a challenge. Jasmine arrived at Dulles International Airport 3 hours before her flight, a habit ingrained after years of random, additional screenings. The departures hall bustled with early morning travelers, business people clutching coffee cups, and families corralling excited children. Jasmine joined the TSA pre-check line, pulling her carefully packed carry-on behind her. Despite paying extra for pre-check specifically to avoid extensive security procedures, the TSA agent frowned when examining her boarding pass and ID. "Ma'am, I need you to step over to secondary screening," he said without making eye contact. Is there a problem with my documentation? Jasmine asked politely, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the familiar sinking feeling in her stomach. Just routine, ma'am, the agent replied dismissively, already waving the next traveler through without additional scrutiny. Jasmine watched as several white passengers sailed through the pre-check line unhindered. Their bags passed through the scanner without pause, their bodies never subjected to the humiliating wand or pat-down she knew awaited her. This was the tax she paid for traveling while black: extra time, extra scrutiny, extra humiliation. At the secondary screening area, a female TSA agent pulled on blue gloves. "I'll need to check your hair," she stated flatly. "My hair?" Jasmine touched her neatly styled twists reflexively. "Standard procedure," the agent responded, though Jasmine noticed none of the blonde or brunette passengers received similar attention. The agent's fingers probed through Jasmine's hair while another officer methodically unpacked her carefully organized carry-on, examining her presentation materials, her toiletries, even flipping through her medical journals. "What's the purpose of your travel?" asked a white TSA supervisor who had appeared beside the table. "I'm presenting at a medical conference in San Francisco," Jasmine explained, maintaining her composure. "I'm a neurosurgeon at Howard University Hospital." The supervisor's eyebrows rose slightly as he glanced at her first-class boarding pass again. "This ticket is in your name, Dr. Washington." The implication was clear: how could someone like her afford first class? How could someone like her be a doctor? Jasmine had heard the unspoken questions too many times to count. "Yes, it is," she replied firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. After 30 minutes of additional screening, Jasmine finally reclaimed her belongings and headed toward her gate. Her shoulders remained tense, her professional mask firmly in place despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Let me guess, random screening?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Jasmine turned to find a tall black man in a tailored suit offering a knowing smile. His boarding pass, visible in his breast pocket, showed he was also traveling to San Francisco. "Terrell Jackson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Happens every time I fly, no matter what credentials I flash." "Jasmine Washington," she replied, shaking his hand. "And yes, apparently my twists might be harboring contraband." They both laughed, the shared experience creating an instant connection. "First class too, I see," Terrell noted, glancing at her boarding pass. "I'm heading to a tech conference." "You?" "Medical presentation," Jasmine replied. "Figured first class would let me arrive somewhat functional after a 6-hour flight." "Smart move," Terrell nodded. "Though be prepared for the looks. I've developed what I call the first-class black person toolkit. Rule 1, arrive early to avoid the inevitable, "Are you sure you're in the right line?" conversation. Already following that one, Jasmine smiled. "What's rule 2? Have your credentials ready to flash." "I carry my MBA diploma photo on my phone now," he joked, though they both knew it wasn't really a joke at all. They continued chatting as they approached Gate C-22, sharing strategies for navigating spaces not designed with them in mind. The camaraderie was a brief respite from the isolation Jasmine often felt in professional settings. As they approached the gate, Jasmine noticed a flight attendant with a pinched expression watching passengers gather. Her name tag read Vivian Cooper, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Jasmine caught fragments of her conversation with another crew member. "First class is getting interesting today, some people just don't know where they belong." Jasmine's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Miranda Chen, the conference organizer. "Dr. Washington, I just wanted to check that you're on schedule. Your presentation slot has generated significant interest, and several hospital directors specifically asked if they could speak with you afterward about implementing your protocols." "I'll be there, Dr. Chen," Jasmine assured her. "My flight leaves in an hour." "Excellent. This could be a turning point for standardizing equitable pain management nationwide. We're counting on you." As Jasmine ended the call, the gate agent announced pre-boarding for first-class passengers. She gathered her belongings, said goodbye to Terrell, and approached the gate, boarding pass in hand. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders. She couldn't afford any delays or complications. Too many people were counting on her presence at that conference, not just Dr. Chen, but every future patient who might benefit from her research. "First-class boarding now," announced the gate agent, her voice crackling over the loudspeaker. Jasmine approached, boarding pass and ID ready. The agent barely glanced at her documents before pointing toward the jet bridge. "Economy boarding is not yet, ma'am," she said dismissively. "Please wait until your group is called." "I'm in first class," Jasmine stated calmly, pointing to her boarding pass. The agent squinted at it with obvious surprise before reluctantly scanning it. The machine beeped its approval. "Oh. Go ahead then," she muttered without an apology. Jasmine stepped onto the plane, where flight attendant Vivian Cooper stood greeting passengers. The same flight attendant she'd overheard making comments at the gate. "Welcome aboard," Vivian said automatically, then looked up. Her smile faltered. "Economy is through there and to the right," she directed, gesturing toward the back of the plane. "I'm in first class, 2A, Jasmine replied, showing her boarding pass for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly as she examined the document. "Are you sure this is your boarding pass?" The implication stung, but Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor. "Yes, quite sure." "Fine," Vivian said with obvious reluctance. "First class is to the left." Jasmine found her window seat and carefully stored her presentation materials in the overhead compartment. She'd just settled in when she felt a splash of cold liquid on her lap. "Oh my! I'm so sorry," Vivian exclaimed with exaggerated concern, though her eyes remained cold. She had, accidentally, spilled water while supposedly adjusting the air vent above Jasmine's seat. The water had splashed onto Jasmine's presentation notes, which she'd placed on her tray table. She quickly dabbed at the papers with a tissue, heart racing as she assessed the damage. Thankfully, the ink hadn't smeared significantly. "Let me get you something to dry that," Vivian said, walking away without actually bringing anything. Meanwhile, white passengers continued boarding first class, each receiving warm smiles and genuine welcomes from the same flight attendant. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson." "Lovely to see you again," Vivian gushed to an older white man who took the aisle seat across from Jasmine. "Your usual Scotch once were airborne." "You know me too well, Vivian," he chuckled. A tall white man in a pilot's uniform walked through the cabin, pausing to chat with several white passengers. "Bill. How's the golf game?" he asked one. "Getting better, Captain Hayes," the passenger replied. "Sarah, did your daughter get into Stanford?" he asked another. The casual familiarity extended to every white passenger in first class but conspicuously excluded Jasmine. She felt eyes on her from several directions, curious, suspicious glances that questioned her presence in this exclusive space. An elderly white woman who had just boarded stopped in the aisle next to Jasmine's row. She leaned toward a flight attendant who wasn't Vivian. "Is it possible to move my seat?" she asked in a stage whisper, glancing pointedly at Jasmine. "I'm not comfortable with my seating arrangement." The flight attendant looked embarrassed but nodded. "Let me see what we can do, Mrs. Whitfield." Jasmine pretended to be absorbed in her slightly damp notes, the familiar knot tightening in her stomach. She'd experienced this countless times. The assumption that she didn't belong, the surprise when she demonstrated her credentials, the microaggressions that couldn't quite be called out individually but accumulated like toxic sediment in her psyche. She glanced up to see Terrell Jackson boarding. He nodded in recognition, taking his seat several rows ahead. His expression said he'd noticed the treatment she was receiving. The solidarity in his glance provided small comfort. The pre-flight drink service began. Vivian moved methodically through the cabin, offering champagne, orange juice, or water to each first-class passenger, until she reached Jasmine's row. She simply passed by without acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Jasmine said politely. "Could I have some water, please?" Vivian turned with obvious reluctance. "We're about to take off. I'll have to get back to you." Yet she continued serving the white passenger directly behind Jasmine. Jasmine took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to appear angry. As a black woman, she knew any display of negative emotion would immediately be labeled as aggression or hostility. The double standard was exhausting but undeniable. She needed to stay focused on her goal, reaching San Francisco in time for her presentation. Everything else was just noise she had to filter out. Captain Hayes made one final pass through the cabin before takeoff. He stopped to chat with the passengers he knew, exchanging pleasantries about families and vacations. When he passed Jasmine's seat, his eyes slid over her as if she were invisible. The plane pushed back from the gate. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, visualizing her presentation, mentally rehearsing her key points. She couldn't let these distractions derail her purpose. Too much was at stake. 2 hours into the flight, the appetizing aroma of the first-class meal service filled the cabin. Jasmine's stomach growled softly. She hadn't eaten breakfast in her rush to arrive early at the airport, and now she was looking forward to the premium dining experience she'd paid for. "Today in first class, we're serving either herb-crusted salmon with wild rice or filet mignon with truffle mashed potatoes," Vivian announced with a bright smile as she moved through the cabin. "Both come with our seasonal roasted vegetable medley and freshly baked rolls." The passengers around Jasmine made their selections, receiving their chosen meals on fine china with real silverware. The presentation was impressive, a stark contrast to the plastic-wrapped sandwiches in economy. When Vivian finally reached Jasmine's row, her smile vanished. She practically threw a packaged turkey sandwich, clearly from economy, onto Jasmine's tray table. "Here you go," she said curtly. Jasmine stared at the plastic-wrapped sandwich in confusion. "I think there's been a mistake. What happened to the salmon or filet option?" Vivian's expression hardened. "We've run out of the first-class meals. This is all that's available." Jasmine glanced around, noting that several white passengers who had boarded after her were currently enjoying their salmon and filet. A man 2 rows behind her was just now being served his first-class meal. "That's strange," Jasmine said evenly, maintaining her composure. "It seems like passengers who boarded after me are still receiving the first-class options. Are you accusing me of something?" Vivian's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Not at all," Jasmine replied calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that I paid for a first-class ticket, which includes first-class meal service. I'd like to receive what I paid for, just like every other passenger in this cabin." Vivian's face flushed. "Well, you should be grateful you're getting anything at all. We're very busy today." The comment hung in the air, its implications clear. "You should be grateful." The familiar refrain Jasmine had heard throughout her life. "You should be grateful you got into medical school. You should be grateful you were hired. You should be grateful to be here at all." "I don't think gratitude is the appropriate response to receiving less than what I paid for," Jasmine responded, her voice still measured despite the anger building inside her. "I'd like to speak to the senior flight attendant, please." Several passengers were now openly watching the interaction. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, but none intervened. "Fine," Vivian snapped, stomping away. "What do you think about how Jasmine is being treated?" Comment number 1 if you believe she's right to stand her ground, or number 2 if you think she should just accept the economy meal to avoid conflict. Hit that like button if you've ever had to advocate for yourself in a similar situation. Minutes later, Vivian returned with a tall, stern-looking man whose name tag identified him as David Miller, senior flight attendant. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, addressing Jasmine with thinly veiled impatience. Jasmine explained the situation succinctly, pointing out that she had received an economy meal while first-class meals were still being served to other passengers. Rather than resolving the issue, David crossed his arms defensively. "Ms. Cooper informed me that we've run out of the premium meals for your dietary preferences." "I never mentioned any dietary preferences," Jasmine countered. "And I couldn't have, since no one asked me. I would have been happy with either the salmon or the fillet." "Look," David said, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing, "we can't have you disrupting the flight. If you continue to be difficult, we'll have to take further action." The threat was clear. Black passengers who caused trouble often found themselves removed from flights, labeled as disruptive regardless of the circumstances. "I'm not being difficult," Jasmine replied. "I'm simply requesting the service I paid for, the same service every other passenger in this cabin is receiving." From a few rows ahead, Terrell Jackson stood up. "Excuse me," he called out. "I couldn't help overhearing. This passenger is absolutely right. I saw several first-class meals being served after she received that economy sandwich." David barely glanced at Terrell. "Sir, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does concern me," Terrell persisted. "As a frequent flyer with this airline, I'm concerned about discriminatory treatment of passengers." "No one is being discriminated against," David insisted, though his eyes shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Several passengers were now openly staring, though most quickly looked away when Jasmine glanced in their direction. Jasmine reached for her phone. "I'd like to document this interaction," she said, opening her camera app. "Absolutely not," Vivian interjected. "Electronic devices must be in airplane mode during flight. If you attempt to record us, we'll have you removed upon landing for violating safety regulations." The situation was escalating beyond a simple meal discrepancy. Jasmine recognized the pattern, a minor injustice, followed by denial, followed by escalating threats when the victim refused to quietly accept the mistreatment. It was a dance she'd witnessed and experienced countless times, but this time, something inside her refused to follow the choreography. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide between standing up for yourself or keeping the peace? What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position right now? And what do you think is about to happen next? The turning point in this story might just surprise you. The standoff continued, with David and Vivian standing over Jasmine's seat, their body language increasingly intimidating. Several passengers had begun recording discreetly on their phones, sensing the tension escalating toward a pivotal moment. "Final warning," David stated firmly. "Accept the meal provided or we'll document this as disruptive behavior." Jasmine took a deep breath. Throughout her life, she'd often swallowed injustice silently, choosing her battles carefully in a world where being labeled difficult could derail her entire career. But today, something shifted inside her. "I understand your position," she said calmly, reaching into her purse. "Now I'd like you to understand mine." From her wallet, she extracted not just her medical credentials but a second identification card. She placed it on her tray table, facing the flight attendants. "I'm not only Dr. Jasmine Washington, Chief of Neurosurgery at Howard University Hospital. I'm also Jasmine Washington, ESQ, partner at Thompson, Washington and Rivera, specializing in civil rights law and transportation discrimination." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. David's confident posture faltered as he leaned forward to examine the credentials. "You're a lawyer." Vivian's voice had lost its edge, replaced by uncertainty. "I am," Jasmine confirmed. "And what's happening right now, the disparate treatment, the intimidation tactics, the threats, violates at least 7 federal aviation regulations and multiple civil rights statutes." The memory of her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "They only respect the law, baby girl. That's why you need to know it better than they do." Those words had driven Jasmine through evening law classes after grueling hospital shifts, studying case precedents while her medical colleagues slept. Dual degrees had meant dual student loans and dual exhaustion, but today validated every sleepless night. I've just documented multiple federal violations, Jasmine continued. Discriminatory service provision under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, failure to provide equal accommodations to a ticketed passenger under FAA Regulation 121.586, and threatening behavior toward a protected class passenger under DOT anti-discrimination policies. David's face had paled considerably. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding, Jasmine interrupted smoothly, is your assumption that I would quietly accept discriminatory treatment. My law firm successfully litigated Jenkins versus Atlantic Airways last year, a $30 million settlement for systemic discrimination against black first-class passengers. The mention of the landmark case, which had made headlines across the airline industry, landed like a thunderclap. Several passengers gasped audibly. I'll need your full names and employee identification numbers, Jasmine continued, pulling out a small notebook. For the record. Vivian stammered, I don't think that's necessary. It's absolutely necessary, Jasmine countered. As is speaking with your captain immediately. David's hand moved to his communication device. I'll inform Captain Hayes of the situation. Excellent, Jasmine replied. While you do that, I'll be contacting my firm's direct line to your airline's legal department. She removed her phone, now with complete confidence. No one mentioned airplane mode or safety regulations as she dialed. Around the cabin, several passengers had begun recording more openly. One woman gave Jasmine a subtle thumbs up. Terrell Jackson watched with undisguised admiration. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in the demeanor of the flight crew. The condescension and hostility had evaporated, replaced by nervous deference. Dr. Washington, please allow me to bring you a first-class meal immediately, Vivian offered, her voice now honeyed with forced politeness. That's not the issue anymore, Jasmine replied. This has escalated well beyond a meal service discrepancy. We're now addressing a pattern of discriminatory behavior that requires formal investigation. Captain William Hayes appeared from the cockpit, his expression grave. I understand there's a situation that requires my attention. Captain Hayes, Jasmine greeted him, extending her legal credentials. We have a serious matter of passenger discrimination that has now evolved into potential legal liability for your airline. The captain examined her credentials with growing concern. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I think we're well past privacy, Jasmine replied. Your crew has publicly discriminated against me and then threatened me when I objected. Every passenger in this cabin has witnessed it. As if to emphasize her point, the distinctive sound of a social media upload notification chimed from somewhere in the cabin. My colleagues at the firm are already receiving documentation of this incident, Jasmine continued, though in truth, she hadn't contacted anyone yet. Strategic pressure was part of effective negotiation. Another skill she'd honed over years of battling systemic bias. The captain's expression shifted from concern to alarm. Airline executives were hypersensitive to social media incidents that could damage their brand and stock prices within hours. Dr. Washington, he began cautiously, I assure you this doesn't reflect our airline's policies or values. Policies are meaningless without proper implementation, Jasmine interjected. The question now is how you plan to address this situation. And whether that response will happen before or after this incident goes viral. The power dynamic had completely reversed. The same crew that had dismissed and threatened her minutes ago now anxiously awaited her next words, suddenly acutely aware of the consequences of their actions. In that moment, Jasmine thought of her grandmother again, and of every patient whose pain had been dismissed because of their skin color. Some battles needed to be fought not just for oneself, but for everyone who would come after. Captain Hayes, Jasmine said, her voice clear and authoritative, federal aviation regulations require equal treatment of all passengers regardless of race, gender, or ethnicity. What's happened here goes beyond poor customer service, it's a violation of federal law. The captain shifted uncomfortably, aware that every word was potentially being recorded by multiple passengers. "I understand your concerns, Dr. Washington, but perhaps we could resolve this after we land in San Francisco." "That would be insufficient," Jasmine replied. "In addition to the discriminatory meal service, I've identified several safety violations that occurred during this incident." "Safety violations?" Captain Hayes echoed, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Yes. Your flight attendants threatened a passenger for documenting discrimination, which violates FAA whistleblower protection protocols. They created an intimidating environment in the cabin, which compromises passenger safety and crew readiness in case of an actual emergency. And they displayed prejudicial treatment that calls into question whether all passengers would receive equal assistance in a crisis situation." The captain's radio crackled. He excused himself momentarily to answer it, stepping a few feet away but remaining in the cabin. Several passengers were now openly discussing what they'd witnessed. The phrases, "completely unprofessional," and "obvious discrimination," floated through the air. The social media machine was already churning. This incident wouldn't remain contained within the aircraft. When Captain Hayes returned, his expression had shifted dramatically. "Dr. Washington, I've just spoken with our operations center. They've instructed me to return to the gate immediately." A collective groan rose from the passengers. "I apologize for the inconvenience," the captain announced to the cabin. "We need to return to the gate to address an onboard service issue. We'll update you regarding our departure time once we've resolved the matter." The aircraft began its taxi back to Dulles International. Jasmine remained composed, though her heart raced with the implications of what she'd set in motion. This wasn't just about a meal anymore, it was about accountability. As they approached the gate, Jasmine's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. number. "Dr. Washington. This is Patricia Alvarez from Corporate Legal at Transcontinental Airlines. We've been notified of an incident on Flight 1382 to San Francisco." "That's correct," Jasmine confirmed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I've documented multiple violations of federal aviation regulations and civil rights statutes. We take these allegations extremely seriously," Patricia assured her. "Our customer service team is already at the gate to address this situation." True to her word, when the aircraft door opened, 3 airline representatives in corporate attire boarded immediately. They conferred briefly with the captain before approaching Jasmine's seat. "Dr. Washington. I'm Michael Torres, Vice President of Customer Experience. These are my colleagues from our Legal Department and Diversity Office. We'd like to speak with you about what occurred today." "I'm happy to discuss it," Jasmine replied, "but I'll need documentation of the incident first, including the names and statements of the crew members involved." "Of course," Michael agreed. "We've already begun that process. Captain Hayes has informed us of the situation, and we're reviewing it with the utmost seriousness." The revelation that followed stunned even Jasmine. During their private conversation in the jetway, Michael confirmed that Vivian Cooper had 3 previous passenger complaints alleging similar discriminatory behavior. The airline had documented the incidents but taken no substantive action. "This isn't an isolated incident," Jasmine said firmly. "It's a pattern that your airline has chosen to ignore." By now, passengers were becoming increasingly frustrated with the delay. Some directed their anger at the airline staff, while others, having witnessed the original discrimination, expressed solidarity with Jasmine. "How long are we going to sit here because they couldn't treat everyone equally?" one passenger demanded loudly. The situation escalated when an FAA representative arrived, having been notified about potential safety regulation violations. The official requested formal statements from Jasmine, the crew, and several passenger witnesses. "This flight isn't going anywhere for at least 2 hours," Michael finally admitted. "We need to replace the flight crew and complete the necessary documentation." Murmurs of discontent spread through the cabin. Jasmine felt a moment of doubt. Her stand for justice was now affecting dozens of innocent passengers. But then Terrell Jackson appeared beside her seat. "Don't second-guess yourself," he said quietly. This needed to happen. These companies only change when forced to. Another passenger, a middle-aged white woman, leaned across the aisle. "My daughter experiences this kind of treatment all the time with her black husband. It's appalling. Thank you for standing up." The support strengthened Jasmine's resolve. Sometimes disruption was necessary for progress. The temporary inconvenience of a delayed flight paled in comparison to the persistent indignities faced by black travelers every day. As passengers were eventually allowed to deplane while a new crew was assembled, Jasmine remained in her seat, providing her statement to the FAA official. Her medical conference presentation seemed increasingly out of reach, but the unexpected turn of events had opened a different kind of platform. One with potentially greater impact. While the passengers waited in the terminal for their flight to be reassigned, the story of what had transpired spread like wildfire. A tech-savvy passenger had uploaded video clips to TikTok and Twitter before they even left the aircraft. Within an hour, #JusticeForJasmine was trending nationally, with millions of views and thousands of comments. "This is insane," Terrell said, showing Jasmine his phone screen. "You've gone viral." The clips showed the most damning moments. Vivian delivering the economy meal while first-class options continued to other passengers, David's thinly veiled threats, and Jasmine's calm but powerful response revealing her legal credentials. News outlets began picking up the story. "Black doctor/lawyer grounds flight after racial discrimination," read one headline. "Airline faces backlash after first-class passenger served economy meal," declared another. Jasmine watched the unfolding media storm with mixed emotions. She hadn't sought this attention, but perhaps it would force meaningful change in an industry long plagued by racial disparities in passenger treatment. "Dr. Washington." A young black woman approached tentatively. "I'm Aaliyah Brown. I was in economy on our flight. I just wanted to say thank you. Last month, the same thing happened to my brother in first class, but he didn't have the knowledge to fight back." Jasmine squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry your brother experienced that. Too many of us just endure these indignities because fighting back seems too costly." As Aaliyah walked away, memories flooded Jasmine's mind, the countless times she'd remained silent in the face of discrimination. The time a nurse had mistaken her for janitorial staff despite her white coat and credentials. The patient who had refused to believe she was really a neurosurgeon. The department head who'd attributed her research success to diversity initiatives, rather than merit. Each time, she had swallowed her anger and carried on, believing that her individual success would eventually help dismantle the system. But perhaps direct confrontation was sometimes necessary too. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Miranda Chen, "Saw what happened. News reached SF, conference extending your slot to tomorrow. Entire medical board wants to hear not just your research but your experience today. This matters." Relief washed over her. Her presentation wouldn't be lost after all, in fact, it would now have even greater context and impact. Meanwhile, Transcontinental Airlines executives were in crisis mode. Their stock had dropped 4% in the hours since the first videos appeared online. The hashtag boycott Transcontinental was gaining traction, with competitors subtly capitalizing on the moment with their own posts about inclusive service. Michael Torres approached Jasmine again, his expression grave. "Dr. Washington, our CEO would like to speak with you directly." He handed her his phone. On the screen was Elizabeth Garrison, Transcontinental's chief executive, speaking from what appeared to be a corporate boardroom filled with anxious executives. "Dr. Washington, first let me offer my sincere apologies for your experience today," Elizabeth began. "What happened was inexcusable and completely contrary to our company values. With respect, Ms. Garrison," Jasmine replied, "if it were truly contrary to your values, you would have addressed the previous complaints against this same flight attendant. This incident reflects systemic issues within your corporate culture. The CEO's polished facade cracked slightly. "You're right. We've failed to properly address these issues. That changes today. I'm personally overseeing a comprehensive review of our training and accountability procedures." "I appreciate that," Jasmine said, "but what about the broader pattern of discrimination that affects black passengers across your airline and others? My experience today wasn't unique, it was just unusually well documented." As they continued their conversation, more passengers approached Jasmine, sharing their own stories of discrimination while traveling. Each account strengthened her conviction that this moment could catalyze real change. Reporters had gathered at the terminal, held at bay by airline staff but clearly eager to speak with Jasmine. Her phone continued buzzing with messages, colleagues, friends, even old classmates who had recognized her in the viral videos. "Dr. Washington." It was an airline representative. "We've arranged a new flight crew and aircraft. We'll be boarding shortly. The CEO has authorized a full refund for all passengers for the inconvenience." Terrell, who had remained nearby throughout the ordeal, shook his head in amazement. From being denied a meal to grounding a plane and getting everyone refunded. That's what I call impact. Jasmine smiled, but her mind was already shifting to the broader implications. A refund didn't address the underlying issues. As passengers began gathering their belongings for the reboarding announcement, she pulled Michael Torres aside. "Before we proceed," she said firmly, "I want documentation of exactly what changes Transcontinental will implement, with specific timelines and accountability measures." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "We're already drafting a comprehensive response." "And I want data," Jasmine added. "Transparent reporting on passenger complaints broken down by race and resolution outcomes. If you're serious about change, you need to measure it." As they negotiated these terms, Jasmine realized that her impromptu stand for justice had evolved into something much larger than herself. The ripple effects would extend far beyond this single flight or even this airline, potentially influencing how companies across the transportation industry addressed racial equity. Her grandmother would have been proud. Sometimes the most powerful medicine wasn't administered in an operating room but in the court of public opinion, where systemic diseases required systemic cures. Thomas Blackwell, Senior Vice President of Operations at Transcontinental Airlines, arrived at Dulles International Airport via private corporate jet just as the passengers were preparing to board their rescheduled flight. His unexpected appearance signaled just how seriously the company was taking the escalating PR crisis. "Dr. Washington," he called, approaching Jasmine with an outstretched hand. "A moment of your time, please." Jasmine excused herself from her conversation with Terrell and followed Thomas to a private airport lounge. The luxurious space, normally reserved for the airline's highest-tier elite members, was currently empty except for two corporate attorneys and a woman Jasmine recognized as the company's diversity officer from their website. "First, let me extend my deepest personal apologies," Thomas began once they were seated. "What happened today was inexcusable." "I appreciate that," Jasmine replied evenly. "But I'm more interested in actions than apologies." Thomas nodded, opening a leather portfolio. "We'd like to offer you complete reimbursement for your ticket, $10,000 in compensation for your distress, and lifetime elite status with our airline." "And in exchange?" Jasmine asked, already knowing the answer. "We'd ask you to sign this non-disclosure agreement regarding today's events," one of the attorneys interjected smoothly, sliding a document across the table. "A standard confidential settlement." Jasmine didn't even glance at the papers. "I'm not interested in a private resolution that leaves the underlying issues unaddressed." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. $10,000 is substantially above the standard compensation for service issues. "This wasn't a service issue," Jasmine interrupted. "It was discrimination, followed by intimidation, followed by a cover-up attempt. And it's clearly part of a pattern." She removed her phone and pulled up an email she'd received 20 minutes earlier from a civil rights organization. Since the videos went viral, 37 black passengers have already submitted accounts of similar discriminatory treatment on your airline in the past year alone. My law firm has been contacted by 14 of them." The diversity officer leaned forward. "Dr. Washington, I've only been in my position for 6 months. I'd very much like to hear more about these cases." Thomas shot her a warning glance, but Jasmine seized the opening. "I believe the only acceptable resolution is systemic change," she stated firmly. "I'm not looking to profit from this situation personally. I want Transcontinental to acknowledge the problem publicly and commit to specific, measurable improvements." For the next 45 minutes, as their rescheduled flight remained at the gate, Jasmine outlined her requirements: comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, transparent tracking and reporting of discrimination complaints, an independent audit of the airline's practices, and the establishment of clear consequences for employees who engaged in discriminatory behavior. "This is extensive," Thomas said carefully when she finished. "So is the problem," Jasmine countered. "And addressing it properly will ultimately cost less than the lawsuits and boycotts you're facing if you don't." As they negotiated, Jasmine received another text from Dr. Chen, conference organizers unanimous. "We want you to deliver keynote tomorrow instead of your scheduled session." Topic expanded to include transportation discrimination's impact on medical access for minorities. The message strengthened Jasmine's resolve. This wasn't just about one meal on one flight anymore, it had evolved into an opportunity to address interconnected systems of inequality. "One more thing," Jasmine added. "The crew members involved need to be removed from today's flight. They've already been placed on administrative leave pending investigation," Thomas assured her. "Not good enough," Jasmine insisted. "Your passengers, particularly your black passengers, shouldn't have to wonder if the people serving them hold discriminatory attitudes that might affect their safety or comfort." After further discussion, an agreement was reached. Vivian and David would be removed from flight duties and required to complete extensive retraining before any potential reinstatement. Captain Hayes, whose failure to properly address the situation had exacerbated it, would also face consequences. When Jasmine finally exited the lounge, the boarding process was nearly complete. Passengers who recognized her from the earlier confrontation nodded in solidarity or quietly thanked her. A new flight crew stood at the aircraft door, their body language conveying acute awareness of the scrutiny they were under. The senior flight attendant, a black woman named Tanya Robertson, greeted Jasmine with genuine warmth. "Dr. Washington, we're honored to have you aboard. Your first-class seat has been prepared with a special meal from our executive chef." The captain extends his personal welcome and asks that you let us know if there's anything at all we can do to make your journey comfortable. The transformation was remarkable, from discrimination to deference in the span of a few hours. But Jasmine took no pleasure in the special treatment. True equality wouldn't mean exceptional service for those who could force it through legal pressure, it would mean consistent, respectful treatment for everyone regardless of race. As she settled into her seat, Terrell stopped by on his way to his own. "So," he said with a grin, "did they offer you ownership of the airline, or just a private jet?" Jasmine laughed. "Neither. But they did agree to some changes that might actually make a difference." "Because of you," Terrell noted. "Most people would have taken the money and signed the NDA. Most people don't have the privilege of dual advanced degrees and a law firm behind them," Jasmine replied soberly. "I had to use that privilege for something beyond myself." As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, nearly 5 hours behind schedule, Jasmine's phone lit up with notifications. Hashtag Transcontinental Accountability was now trending alongside hashtag Justice for Jasmine. The story had evolved from viral moment to movement, with organizations and individuals across the country joining the conversation about transportation discrimination. The plane lifted into the air, carrying Jasmine toward San Francisco and her expanded platform at the medical conference. But it also carried something else, the potential for genuine change in an industry that had too often reflected and reinforced society's racial hierarchies. As they reached cruising altitude, Jasmine finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The confrontation had been draining, but necessary. Sometimes healing, whether of bodies or systems, required lancing the wound before recovery could begin. 6 months later, Jasmine stood at the podium in the Grand Ballroom of the Hilton San Francisco, addressing the American Medical Association's annual conference. Her journey had come full circle, bringing her back to the city where her viral moment had transformed into a movement. The connection between transportation discrimination and healthcare disparities isn't immediately obvious, she told the rapt audience of medical professionals. But consider this. When Black patients face barriers to reliable, dignified transportation, they miss appointments, delay preventive care, and arrive at hospitals under emergency conditions rather than for routine treatment. The screen behind her displayed data from her expanded research study, which now incorporated transportation access as a factor in racial healthcare disparities. What had begun as research into pain management inequities had evolved into a comprehensive examination of systemic barriers to equitable healthcare. Her presentation at the original conference 6 months ago, delivered a day late but to a packed auditorium, had received a standing ovation and sparked immediate interest from hospital administrators nationwide. But that was just the beginning. Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Equitable Access Initiative, Jasmine continued, a partnership between Howard University Hospital, Thompson, Washington and Rivera Law Firm, and the newly established Transcontinental Airlines Foundation for Inclusive Transportation. The audience applauded as Thomas Blackwell joined her on stage. The airline executive looked markedly different from their first meeting. More humble, more thoughtful, his corporate polish tempered by 6 months of intensive work on discrimination issues. Transcontinental Airlines has committed $20 million to fund research, training, and policy development aimed at eliminating discrimination across the transportation sector, Thomas announced. This initiative grew directly from Dr. Washington's courage in holding us accountable. What Thomas didn't mention was the behind-the-scenes transformation that had occurred within the airline. The incident had forced a reckoning throughout the company, from boardroom to cabin crew. The data Jasmine had demanded revealed patterns of discriminatory treatment that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. After the presentation, Jasmine made her way through the crowd of medical professionals eager to discuss collaboration opportunities. She spotted a familiar face approaching, Terrell Jackson, whose tech company had become a key partner in developing tracking systems for transportation discrimination reports. Dr. Washington, he greeted her with a warm hug. Another standing ovation. "You're making a habit of this." "It's still surreal," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe that everything that's happened started with an economy meal in first class." "It didn't start with a meal," Terrell corrected her. "It started long before that, with your grandmother, with your decision to pursue both medicine and law, with every experience that prepared you for that moment." Jasmine nodded, thinking of the framed photo of Grandma Esther that now sat prominently on her desk at the legal aid clinic she'd established for transportation discrimination cases. The clinic had already assisted over 200 individuals in documenting and addressing discriminatory treatment across various transportation modes. As they moved toward the reception area, Jasmine was surprised to see a familiar face among the conference attendees, Captain William Hayes, the pilot from that fateful flight. "Dr. Washington," he said, approaching with evident humility. "I wanted to thank you personally. After that day, I went through the airline's new training program and then volunteered to become a facilitator. It's opened my eyes to biases I didn't even realize I carried." His transformation was one of many unexpected outcomes. Rather than simply firing Vivian Cooper, Transcontinental had created a pathway for education and redemption. After completing extensive anti-bias training and community service with civil rights organizations, Vivian now participated in new hire training, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale. The goal was never punishment for its own sake, Jasmine explained to a reporter later that evening. It was accountability that leads to growth and systemic change. The data supported the impact of these changes. Customer satisfaction scores among Black passengers had increased by 38%. Discrimination complaints had decreased, while the resolution rate for those that did occur had improved dramatically. Other airlines, noting Transcontinental's recovery from the PR crisis through substantive reform rather than superficial damage control, had begun implementing similar programs. As the conference reception wound down, Jasmine stepped outside onto the hotel terrace overlooking San Francisco Bay. The lights of the Golden Gate Bridge twinkled in the distance, a reminder of connections built and barriers overcome. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A national civil rights organization had named her their Person of the Year. The accompanying article praised her unique combination of medical expertise, legal knowledge, and moral courage in confronting systemic discrimination. Jasmine smiled, thinking of how many black travelers had reached out to her over the past 6 months, sharing their own stories and thanking her for giving voice to experiences often endured in silence. Each message reinforced her conviction that the difficult stand she'd taken that day had been necessary and worthwhile. The next morning, as Jasmine boarded her flight home to Washington, D.C., she experienced the subtle but profound difference her actions had created. The diverse flight crew welcomed passengers with consistent courtesy. The captain made a point of greeting her by name and title. And when meal service began, every passenger received their proper meal, served with equal respect regardless of race. It was a small victory in the context of broader societal inequities, but meaningful nonetheless. Sometimes transformation began with seemingly minor moments of accountability: an economy meal refused, a lawyer's card revealed, a flight grounded, a system changed. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Jasmine thought of her grandmother's words once more. "They only respect the law, baby girl." But now she understood a deeper truth: the law was just a tool. Real change came from people brave enough to use it, communities determined to support them, and institutions willing to evolve. What would you do if faced with discrimination like Dr. Washington experienced? Would you have the courage to stand your ground? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it resonated with you. Your support helps us continue bringing these important narratives to light. Thank you for joining us on this journey of justice and transformation. Until next time, remember that one person's courage can indeed change systems that once seemed immovable. Dr. Jasmine Washington's experience teaches us that sometimes standing up against discrimination requires both preparation and courage. By combining her medical expertise with legal knowledge, she transformed what could have been just another incident of racial bias into a catalyst for systemic change. The story highlights how discrimination often manifests in subtle ways: an economy meal instead of first-class service. But these small injustices are symptoms of deeper societal problems. We learn that documentation and knowing your rights are powerful tools when facing discrimination. Dr. Washington's ability to specifically cite regulations and laws transformed the power dynamic instantly. Yet the story also reminds us that such knowledge is a privilege not everyone possesses. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative demonstrates that meaningful change requires going beyond individual compensation to demand systemic accountability. Rather than accepting a personal settlement, Dr. Washington insisted on policy changes, training programs, and ongoing monitoring that would benefit countless future travelers. The transformation of former antagonists, from Captain Hayes to Vivian, shows that education can create allies from adversaries. True justice isn't just about punishment but about creating pathways for growth and understanding. Finally, this story reminds us that silence perpetuates injustice. By speaking up despite the risks, Dr. Washington not only reclaimed her dignity but paved the way for others to receive the equal treatment they deserve. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination but felt powerless to address it? Dr. Washington's story shows that preparation and courage can transform these painful moments into opportunities for change. Share your experiences in the comments below. What strategies have helped you stand up against unfair treatment? How do you think transportation companies should address bias in their services? If this story moved you or made you think differently about everyday discrimination, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shine a light on social justice issues. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of empowerment. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploring difficult but necessary conversations. Remember, as Dr. Washington demonstrated, sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice can ripple outward to create meaningful change for many. Until next time, stay courageous and keep advocating for equality in all spaces.